word creativity doesn't mean, you know, we're all arty in a business. It means that people are thinking, how can they do things differently? I think businesses can learn a lot of different things from the success of Snapchat. Well, first of all, it was one of a few very hyper growth businesses in its sector. And we went from pre-IPO to IPO to scaling. So I think understanding and learning from that extraordinary journey is always interesting to a lot of ambitious businesses. Then it's really how to build a business serving, I suppose, the next generation of customer, because Snap is and was at the forefront of understanding that next generation, how they communicate and how that communication, how they interact has evolved. And Snap really understands that better than really most companies, with the sort of data and knowledge they have when they've been building the product. Then there is the commercial side. When you think about what Snap accomplished, when I was there, I grew the business to the EMEA region from $0 to $1 billion. And I think that just gives you an idea of how do you know, I could absolutely be sharing how do you do that? How do you go into different countries in a thoughtful way? How do you build meaningful partnerships? How do you disrupt, really? And what Snap did was disrupt the advertising sector, create new ad formats within the mobile ecosystem. And then lastly, I talk a lot about creativity. Actually, Snap was really at the creative forefront, understanding the power of technology and the intersection of creativity. So Snap really is the world leader in augmented reality. And so through the Snap camera, we were really bringing augmented reality to millions and millions of people. And I don't think there was many companies that could claim they could do it. So a lot of my experience was about how you take technology like augmented reality and apply it to real world examples. One great example of that is retail. How do you bring the shopping experience into people's homes through the Snap camera? So that's just a few examples of what companies can learn from Snapchat. This is a question I get asked a lot, about how to expand your business globally. And a lot of companies are trying to do that at speed. So the advice I always give when I'm advising in this space is really, whilst you're doing it at speed, you have to find a balance of doing it in a thoughtful manner. Because each country, while might look on the surface similar, there are always nuance in a country, from whether it's nuance in just customer behavior and how people kind of cultural nuances, to thinking about the regulatory environment. So regulation can look very different. From employment law, how you hire people, how do you motivate people, it looks very different in different countries. And the reality is, what I've learned and what I like to share is that you can't be successful scaling if you don't go deep in a market. So I think the experience I've had in my time, particularly in Snapchat and other environments, is really about balancing that need for speed with understanding the market you go in and do it successfully. And I think that's really important, that companies manage that process. I think the first thing is, everyone's talking about AI as the future. Well, the reality is AI is here. It's changing behavior across multiple sectors and consumer behavior. The thing I always say, though, is that you have to look to the past to understand what's happening. So I was lucky that, you know, I got into this sort of internet digital world of advertising in 2000, before Facebook existed, before Google existed. And that was really one of our first major revolutions in how technology was going to change everything we did, from shopping to business to communication to everything. And then if you think, it was then mobile, and then really social media changed our way we communicated, and actually how we spent our time and how we consumed news and so on. So if you think about AI as the next revolution, and I think I find it fascinating is a lot of companies are sort of making similar to mistakes they made in the past, which is, oh, I need to have an AI strategy in the same way they had to have a digital strategy. And I really implore companies to really think about, what problems am I trying to solve for? Or what are my opportunities does AI give me? And think about how it kind of goes into the DNA of the company. AI is not one of those things where you're just going to set up a task force or incubate and it's just going to kind of work out. AI in most sectors, you just have to think about the obvious places: healthcare, finance, retail, and it goes on. But there's some really obvious places where it's not only going to transform how those sectors communicate with their customer base or partners, it's going to change how their employees operate. It's going to change processes, systems, actually the type of people you're going to hire in the next 5 years. So I'd really encourage leaders in companies to really think about AI as a way of working, not a piece of tech. And I think that's a really important thing, because I think when digital came along, I used to often get pulled into the room of like, we need the digital person. The reality is you'll always need specialists to really understand the full potential and to be able to understand the technical impact, and of course to understand where it's going and what the potential is. But everybody needs to understand the language of AI, what it could mean to their business. And I think that's really important, that leaders hold their entire management team responsible for, and also make sure then it feeds through and it becomes part of the company. And it's not buzzwords, it's literally what they do and how they do things. I think every company will talk about use the words like innovation and creativity. Sometimes it's really hard to do in practice, because I always say most businesses, you're beholden to your shareholders. You're looking often at short-term results because you have to, particularly when times are tougher. So I think you need to make sure you've got the right talent. And I once got asked, what type of people do you look to hire? And I always talk about like people who are curious, people who are going to ask questions of like, why do we do it like that? Or how could we do it differently? And the word creativity doesn't mean, we're all arty in a business. It means that people are thinking, how can they do things differently? So I would be encouraging, the finance department to think, well, clearly we have to do things from a compliance point of view, but is there a different process we could adopt to make something more efficient? And that's creativity, right? It's not just about people coming up with nice ideas over there. And innovation, there always needs to be I always say, the sort of champions in a business. It's not, again, putting people in sort of small teams that go off and just do innovation and transformation. But you do need to make sure that you've got people that are passionate about innovating. And it's really important, and I think people forget this, that again, it feeds through all the way through to your performance reviews. So when you're reviewing your teams, that you're not just going, oh, you've done your job, we've had the results. It's looking at the how, and have they changed things? Or are they just doing this job the same way they've done it year over year? And maybe it's sort of working to a degree, but at some point that's going to stop. So it's really, really important that not just the type of people you hire, not just sort of the culture in a company, because culture basically creates the innovation and creativity, but how you hold people accountable and how you reward them. You need to make sure that it feeds through. And that's the only way you create a culture of innovation and creativity in a company.